In 1849, a German immigrant arrived in Detroit with $150 and a closely guarded beer recipe that would build an empire. By 1988, the Stroh family controlled $9 billion in assets, only to lose it all within 20 years. Please comment legacy if you value unity. The strategic philosophy of the founding generations was rooted in a paternalistic management style that valued human connection. John Stroh Sr. was renowned for walking the brewery floor, knowing every single worker by their first name. This created a sense of loyalty that made employees willing to go above and beyond for the family. This belief in regional excellence was the soul of the business during its golden age of mid-century. But Peter Stroh, the fourth-generation leader, reframed the entire industry as a national battlefield for total dominance. He intended to compete with the giants like Miller or die trying, which was a fatal strategic contradiction. Utility and quality were replaced by a thirst for national scale that the company could not truly afford. By ignoring the core Midwestern customer to chase vanity, the leadership abandoned the very principles that built them. The shift from organic growth to aggressive debt-funded acquisition marked the beginning of the end for the dynasty. Reframing the business as a national player required capital that the regional powerhouse did not possess on its own. Instead of innovation, the family chose to pursue consolidation through massive leverage and high-risk financial maneuvers. This contradiction of the founding values proved that inherited ambition can be a destructive force for any system. Strategic discipline was traded for the illusion of growth at any cost across the entire North American continent. The ancestors survived prohibition and depressions by remaining adaptable to the needs of their loyal local customers always. Peter, however, looked at a shrinking industry and decided to bet the entire house on national market share. The financial engine of the Stroh empire was transformed into a high-risk leveraged machine during the 80s. Peter executed a leveraged buyout of Schlitz that shocked the entire industry by borrowing $500 million. This was a staggering risk, considering the company book value was only $100 million in total. This massive debt load crippled the company's strategic flexibility at the exact moment the beer industry was transforming. The financial engine was no longer fueled by profit, but by the desperate need to service interest payments. Every dollar generated by sales was diverted to banks rather than being reinvested into modern light beer innovation. Unlike many old money dynasties, the Stroh family had concentrated their fortune almost entirely within the brewing assets. They lacked the yachts and jets, but also the diversified portfolios that protect wealth during an industry collapse. When the beer market shifted, the family had no safety net to catch them, as the machine failed. The technical breakdown of their wealth reveals a concentration that made them vulnerable to a single industry downturn. The Schlitz brand was already declining, having destroyed its reputation through cost-cutting measures that altered its taste. By acquiring a sick competitor, Stroh inherited massive overcapacity and liabilities that the machine could not eventually process. Furthermore, the machine was drained by lavish dividend expectations from family members who were divorced from business realities. Eric Stroh received $800,000 annually in dividends, even as the company struggled to pay debts. This drain on capital prevented the necessary modernization required to compete with national giants like Anheuser-Busch today. The financial milestones tell a story of rapid evaporation from $700 million in '88 to zero. The trust structure that preserved control for a century could not balance the interests of working family members against those who simply viewed the brewery as a source of cash for antiques and auction house trips. The crucible of the Stroh family began with Bernhard fleeing the German Revolution to start a wheelbarrow brewery. The family survived the devastation of Prohibition in 1920 by demonstrating genuine adaptability through ice cream sales. This pivot provided the cash flow that sustained them through 13 years of enforced abstinence from their core. However, the true dark night of the soul arrived in 1985 when they demolished their birthplace. The original Detroit facility, where Bernhard first built his legacy, was razed to make room for an expansion. The company demolished its own heart to build an empire that no longer needed a soul to survive. This symbolic catastrophe marked the end of the connection between the family and their loyal Midwestern workforce. The demolition of the Graciote Avenue plant was emotionally devastating and signaled a move toward a cold bureaucracy. I would love to hear about your own experiences with setbacks or the weight of expectations below today. The crucible of the 80s proved that an empire without a heart cannot sustain its own heavy weight. By firing 890 workers, the company severed the paternalistic bond that was its greatest moat. They analyzed this failure too late to save the business from the consequences of their cold, strategic calculations. The demolition of the Detroit brewery was not the end of the dynasty, but the beginning of the end. It showed that the leadership prioritized national consolidation over the very heritage that made them a trusted name. A wheelbarrow brewery became a billion-dollar empire, but lost its identity in the cold pursuit of scale. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the company was positioned to capitalize immediately with full-strength beer. This head start was a result of the discipline and hard work of the second and third generations. But the fourth generation traded that hard-won stability for a debt-fueled dream that ended in disaster. The competitive moat that protected Stroh for over a century was centered on a unique fire brewing process. Julius Stroh implemented this in 1908, using direct flame to heat copper kettles rather than steam. This created a malt flavor profile that was truly distinctive and allowed them to dominate the regional market. This secret sauce was supplemented by the family signature, which served as a personal guarantee of brewing quality. The lion emblem further established a brand identity that working-class customers trusted for over 100 years. Competitors using steam could not replicate the taste profile without massive technical investment into their own existing facilities. However, the moat was breached when the fourth generation abandoned the family signature during a desperate rebranding attempt. They removed the personal guarantee from the label and replaced it with modern block lettering and upscale pricing. This move triggered the largest sales decline in beer history, as loyal customers rejected the abandonment of tradition. The moat of fire brewing was the only thing separating Stroh from the cheap, watery, full-calorie commodities. But rebranding attempts cannot fix a fundamental product problem when the market has moved toward light beer trends. The secret sauce was abandoned in favor of marketing gimmicks like the Swedish bikini team, which only backfired. The competitive moat of paternalism and worker loyalty was also destroyed by the closure of the Detroit plant. When the workers realized they were just numbers in a national consolidation game, the magic was forever gone. Competitors like Miller and Coors were able to replicate the scale, but they could not replicate the heart. By the time the leadership recognized the loss of their moat, the debt was already too heavy to pivot. The family signature was replaced by block lettering, and the lion emblem lost its meaning to consumers. The moat that Bernhard built with his wheelbarrow was drained by heirs who did not understand its value. The light beer revolution was the greatest industry shift in a generation, and the Stroh family missed it. While Miller and Budweiser spent millions on light advertising, Stroh was fighting for survival under a debt mountain. Unable to afford marketing, they turned to price competition, which destroyed their margins and undermined their brand equity. In a final act of desperation, Peter hired Hal Riney to rebrand the product for an upscale market. The solution was to remove the beloved family signature and replace it with modern block lettering and pricing. This move triggered the largest sales decline in history as loyal customers rejected the abandonment of their tradition. A potential merger with the Coors family in '89 represented a strategic pivot that could have saved. Coors backed out after seeing the depth of operational problems, and for the first time, dividends were halted. Invite viewers to subscribe to Old Money Habits 7 for more deep dives into these strategic failures today. Price competition was the last refuge of a desperate competitor, and it fundamentally undermined the brand positioning. The 15-pack and 30-pack formats generated volume, but they eroded the margins necessary to fund innovation. This vicious cycle of declining profits and marketing budgets ensured that the brand became a commodity in trade. The global adaptation to a shifting beer market required capital that the family had already spent on Schlitz. While other brewers were modernizing their facilities and marketing, Stroh was closing plants and laying off loyal workers. The strategic pivot to malt liquor brands was an act of desperation rather than a positioned market move. By the time John Stroh III took over in 98, the company had lost key contracts. The Sam Adams production was gone, and the revenue streams were drying up faster than the debt service. The adaptation was impossible because the machine was already broken beyond repair by the previous generation of leaders. The governance of the brewing empire was a vacuum that allowed competing family interests to collide without balance. The company had no independent board of directors and no professional succession planning to protect the corporate soul. This lack of structure allowed the fourth generation to gamble with the legacy without any oversight or accountability. The fifth generation was raised in Grosse Pointe mansions, expecting wealth without being prepared to run a business. There was no systematic development program or mentorship structure to ensure the heirs had the skills to lead. Greg Stroh later acknowledged that the family lost its passion and the drive required to maintain their empire. The Chinese proverb that wealth does not pass 3 generations was validated by the Stroh family tragedy here. The generation that creates works hard, but the third destroys it through entitlement and poor strategic decision-making. Please comment on meritocracy versus inheritance in the section below and share your thoughts on family, business, governance. Governance is the invisible architecture that protects the visible assets from the forces of human ego and entitlement. Without a mechanism to balance dividend expectations against reinvestment, the Stroh machine was destined to run out of fuel. The family principles were replaced by shopping trips to London and antique auctions in the high society. If the family had implemented professional management early, they might have avoided the catastrophic debt of the Schlitz. But the concentration of power in a few hands without an independent board meant that no one could say no to the national dream of Peter Stroh. The system failed because it lacked the proper checks. Succession should be a process of preparing the next generation for the weight of responsibility rather than wealth. The Strohs viewed the brewery as a source of income rather than a business requiring constant technical innovation. When the passion died, the business was sold for scraps to pay down the mountains of accumulated debt. The architectural synthesis of the Stroh fall reveals that durable wealth requires a balance between ambition and discipline. By pursuing national scale on borrowed capital, Peter destroyed the machine his ancestors spent over a century building. Expert recommendations suggest that old money must prioritize the health of the system over the expansion of ego. Consider the counterexample of the Yuengling family, who focused on regional dominance and avoided catastrophic debt levels. They stayed privately held and listened to their consumers rather than chasing the trends of the national market. The Coors family also diversified into related industries like ceramics to provide a safety net for their descendants. The lessons from the wheelbarrow brewery that returned to nothing are clear for anyone building a lasting legacy. This analysis is for educational and reference purposes only, and does not constitute financial or medical advice today. We provide transformative commentary to help you understand the invisible structures that create and protect multi-generational wealth. We are grateful for your time and your commitment to learning from the strategic mistakes of the past. Let us improve our lives together by applying the discipline of the founders to our own systems today. True luxury is the security of a legacy that survives the test of time through wisdom and restraint. The $9 billion beer dynasty was destroyed not by competitors but by its own internal failures of governance. The heirs, entrusted with the preservation of the legacy, became the very agents of its total and final destruction. Do not let your ambition destroy the foundation that your ancestors worked so hard to build today. As we look at the history of old money, it is clear that the habits of discipline are the only thing that can protect a fortune forever. The Stroh family signature may be gone, but the lessons of their fall will remain for those wise enough to listen to the voices of the past.